Nagsara na ng 2 araw yung Cebu International Airport dahil wala nga po silang mga hotels na paglalagyan ng mga dumarating na OFWs at mga overseas Filipinos. No? Habang inaayos lang po yan ay i-reroute muna mga flights.
Primarily, I think emanated from the fact that we were conducting a test upon arrival instead of the day 7, which was actually as mandated by the IATF.
You heard Palace spokesman Harry Roque. He says flights bound for Mactan will be diverted to Manila due to a shortage in quarantine facilities in Cebu. But that comes as news and as a surprise to Cebu health officials who believe the directive may have stemmed from their own set of airport testing protocols. Good evening, I'm Robbie Alampay. You're watching The Big Story. Let's start with a Cebu official saying they were not informed prior to government's move to divert to Manila all international flights bound for Mactan. Gerard de la Peña with The Big Story.
Lack of quarantine hotel rooms. This is the main reason used by the palace for diverting to Manila all international flights bound for Mactan.
Nagsara na ng 2 araw yung Cebu International Airport dahil wala nga po silang mga hotels na paglalagyan ng mga dumarating na OFWs at mga overseas Filipinos. No? Habang inaayos lang po yan ay i-reroute muna mga flights.
But the Health Department's office in Region 7 believes it's because of Cebu's test upon arrival policy.
Primarily, I think emanated from the fact that we were conducting a test upon arrival instead of the day 7, which was actually as mandated by the IATF.
This goes against IATF policy of conducting RT-PCR tests on the 7th day upon arrival, with quarantine lasting for at least 10 days. But for DOH Region 7, their policy is still based on science.
When you do the testing upon arrival, and if the arriving passenger truly have the virus in their system in the incubation period, you would still be able to catch it if that is what you really want. There was just some kind of a variation without really compromising, the capacity to be able to detect the virus.
They expect the new order to have massive repercussions on the province.
Definitely, it will have an impact on our economy. Remember that we also need to revive our arrivals or the use of our airport here.
The Manila International Airport Authority said they're ready to accept additional 300 passengers per day.
Base ho sa kanilang summary, meron hong additional 3 flights per day na lalapag sa ating paliparan. So, maliit na bagay ho yun. Maliit na bagay at kayang-kaya ho natin tanggapin at i-handle.
The move to divert flights from Cebu to Manila will last until June 5. For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, we are One News.
To give us more insights on this development, we have with us DOH Region 7 spokesperson Dr. Mary Jean Loreche. Dr. Loreche, welcome to The Big Story.
Magandang gabi po.
Magandang gabi po. Linawin lang po muna natin kasi ang sinasabi ng Malacanang, dinadivert dahil kulang daw ng quarantine facilities sa Cebu, or for that matter, to service the airport and those arriving in Mactan. How accurate is this?
Kung base po talaga, titingnan natin kung ang testing natin ay gagawin natin on day 7 at i-quarantine po natin si OFW or yung ating arriving na mga Filipinos from overseas, then kukulangin talaga tayo ng hotel rooms for them kasi yung ating pong naka-allocate ay mga 2,400 to 2,500. And you can just imagine if you have 300 arriving or 500 arriving every day, and then quarantine them for 10 days, kasi you're going to test on day 7, that will really congest our hotels. So we will really lack rooms for them. But that's the reason why we have 2 tests conducted. One is on arrival, and if it is negative in 2 to 3 days' time when the results are out, we actually release them to our LGU. But that is applicable only to our one Cebu province policy. So, have to po yun kasi contained in our executive order from the local government unit. So, yun naman po, tapos nagkakaroon tayo ng konting bakante dahil na i-release naman natin sila upon arrival kung negative yung swab results. But for the others na nandito pumapasok sa atin sa Cebu, ang ginagawa po natin, aside from upon arrival testing, tinitest po din natin sila on day 7, compliant with the IATF Resolution 114. At kung sakali man na negative nga sila, tapusin naman nila yung 10 to 14 days kahit na positive sila, i-release naman po sila sa kanilang mga LGU. So basically, I think it's more of, I think the computation of the rooms that will be required, and if they have to stay for the 10 to 14 days and swabbing on day 7, talaga kung kukulangin, kakahulin po tayo, kakapusin tayo ng 1.
Okay, so is this something po that just needs to be clarified with the IATF, or for that matter, does the LGU have that option and that mandate to implement its own system? Kahit pa based on science, if there is some sort of a divergence from what the IATF is saying, does the LGU have that option?
Yan po siguro the best person to answer that would be the authorities on the matter. But yung sa amin lang naman sa Department of Health is on the guidance of the testing protocol, the quarantine protocols, and of course kung ano yung mga health-related issues. Diyan po kami. At tayo naman po ay sumusunod kung anong meron tayong mandate, ginagawa po natin yan.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Dr. Loreche. That was a DOH Region 7 spokesperson, Dr. Mary Jean Loreche. The World Health Organization is looking back on the past 18 months of the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite the development and deployment of vaccines, the WHO is warning no country should assume that it is already out of the woods. Let's watch this.
Almost 18 months into the defining health crisis of our age, the world remains in a very dangerous situation. More cases have been reported so far this year than in the whole of 2020. No country should assume it's out of the woods, no matter its vaccination rate. So far, no variants have emerged that significantly undermine the efficacy of vaccines, diagnostics, or therapeutics. But there is no guarantee that will remain the case. This virus is changing constantly. Future changes could render our tools ineffective and drag us back to square one. Every country can do more. Increase surveillance, testing, sequencing, sharing information, surge supplies needed to protect health workers, fight misinformation and disinformation, empower people and communities to play their part, support businesses and workplaces to take steps to open up safely where appropriate, implement national vaccination strategies, vaccinate those most at risk, and donate vaccines to COVAX. The pandemic is not over, and it will not be over until and unless transmission is controlled in every last country.
And these are the other big stories tonight. Government is refining the A4 priority group as the sector vaccination begins next week. The cluster's inoculation will focus on NCR plus 8. Hundreds of overseas Filipino workers bound for Saudi Arabia got stranded at the NAIA after the government halted deployment to the Middle Eastern kingdom. And it was all professional. Former Eraserheads frontman Eli Buendia says he was never friends with his bandmates, to the dismay of his fans. These big stories after the break. Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. More businesses in Metro Manila will enjoy relaxed restrictions starting June. That's upon the Trade Department's recommendation approved by Metro Manila mayors. The details in Dale De Vera's report.
Guests used to fill up this events place in Quezon City. It hosts bookings almost weekly. The pandemic forced Venue 142 to cease operations, but it will soon be back in business. The Trade Department has recommended to the IATF to allow Metro Manila establishments to operate at a higher capacity starting next week. Events places are included at 30% capacity. Venue 142 owner Mika hopes it will already pave the way for their recovery.
I'm honestly scared, pero life goes on. Kailangan natin kumita ng pera, kailangan natin magbigay ng trabaho sa mga tao.
Metro Manila mayors have already given DTI's recommendation a nod. In an interview with Radio 5, MMC Chairman Edwin Olivares cited the slowing down of cases in the capital as reason for easing restrictions. From 20%, indoor restaurants may operate at 30% next week. Outdoor alfresco dining will remain at 50%. Personal care services like salons and spas will be allowed at 40% from 30%. DTI Secretary Ramon Lopez hopes this will benefit about 200,000 displaced workers, though he noted that relaxations would remain gradual.
We are considering itong mga new variants that are still here at in fact pumapasok pa din yan. Iniiwasan natin ito kasi mga highly transmissible tulad ng nangyari na surge. Nag-umpisa tayo sa 10% and then 20%. Pa 10%, 10% lang. At hindi kaagad tayo tumalon dun sa over 50%.
While the group Resto PH welcomes the move, it urged the government to finally allow vaccinated senior citizens to dine in. Resto PH is also hoping for adjusted curfew hours. Indoor sports venues and fitness establishments meanwhile remain subject for review. For News 5, Dale De Vera, Pier 1 News.
The Interagency Task Force also made some changes to vaccine priority groups. The A4 list, composed of economic frontliners, has been streamlined to 3 categories. If you're a private sector worker required physically at work, a government employee, or part of the informal sector, or perhaps self-employed and working on-site, you can now get vaccinated by June. Departing OFWs are now also in the same rank as healthcare workers in A1. That's if they are scheduled to fly within 4 months from getting the jab. Immediate family members of healthcare workers have also been added to A1, provided more vaccine supply comes in. And not only that, according to the Tourism Department, workers in hotels that have been used as quarantine facilities have now been bumped up from A4 to A1 in the priority list. Secretary Berna Romulo Puyat tells the chiefs that they also hope that leisure workers in tourism sites will be prioritized for vaccination as well. In a letter to Vaccine Czar Carlito Galvez, Romulo Puyat specified tourism workers in Boracay and Bohol.
Sabi ko, baka naman yung mga tourist destinations natin, gusto naman nilang ma-vaccinate na, kung pwedeng mauna na, kasi that's the only way you can accept.
And time for an express look at some of the day's big stories. The call for a National Assembly of PDP Laban is all about drumming up support for the President's programs. That, at least, is according to its Vice Chairman, Energy Secretary Alfonso Cusi. This comes after PDP Laban President Senator Manny Pacquiao urged his party mates to ignore Cusi's call for a National Assembly. He says it's not time for politics. PDP Deputy Secretary General Melvin Matibag was surprised by Pacquiao's statement. He said Cusi's plan was well coordinated. The Philippine Star is reporting that the Philippines is among the countries that will receive doses of excess vaccines from the U.S. This has been confirmed by Philippine Ambassador to the U.S., Babes Romualdez. This donation is part of the 80 million doses committed by U.S. President Joe Biden to be delivered to countries in need by the end of June. The Manila City LGU says the female motorist who was caught hitting a traffic enforcer in Malate also turns out to be a suspected drug courier. The woman was apprehended on Thursday for allegedly disregarding traffic signs and driving without a license. The Manila police have also arrested her supposed accomplices in a separate operation. And today marks the first day of the country's vaccination program for national athletes. More than 500 sports personalities were able to receive their first dose. Gretchen Ho with the details.
41-year-old para-trackster Gerald Bangliwan can now breathe a sigh of relief. He just had his first jab of Sinovac's COVID-19 vaccine. The wheelchair racer is vying for a slot in the Tokyo Summer Paralympic Games.
Ako, inaantay ko rin na magkaroon ng ganito kasi alam ko ito yung isa sa mga paraan para bumalik po dun sa dati yung ginagawa natin kasi kaya ngayon daming restriction.
He is the first vaccinated athlete in the Philippine Olympic Committee-led and IATF-sanctioned vaccination program for our national athletes. More than 500 national athletes, coaches, officials, support staff, and members of the press from over 30 sports will be inoculated today in Manila in time for the Tokyo Olympics and the Southeast Asian Games. Included in the lineup are teams from basketball, volleyball, cycling, skateboarding, sepak takraw, track and field, triathlon, and badminton, just to name a few. SEA Games host country Vietnam recently imposed a no vaccine, no play policy for athletes. Tokyo, on the other hand, has not required vaccination for Olympic athletes.
Feels great, to have that layer of protection. A lot of sports are back to play. And so they are going to be traveling in the next few months, especially with the SEA Games coming up and having to do their international exposure. So it's honestly, we're very thankful. All the athletes here are very thankful to have this protection.
Although he's been to Tokyo recently for his qualifying tournament, first-time Olympian rower Chris Nieves says this shot will give him added confidence in preparing for the Games.
Alam namin na medyo protektado na kami at makapag-training ng maayos na.
POC President Bambol Tolentino says they're looking at doing another batch of inoculations for athletes who weren't able to come and for those who are not yet included in the lineups.
Frontliners din itong mga atleta natin, locally or internationally. Sila naman nagbigay ng karangalan at magbibigay ng karangalan sa bansa.
Gretchen Ho, We Are One News.
We'll take another quick break. When we return, Saudi-bound flights took off empty after the government banned the deployment of OFWs to the Middle Eastern kingdom starting today. And remember the Eraserheads classic on lost friendship, Minsan? As it turns out, no lost friendship to begin with, as the band's members were never friends. That, at least, is according to their frontman, Eli Buendia. The details after the break. Good evening, you're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay. The country has paused its deployment of OFWs to Saudi Arabia over some requirements demanded by foreign employers. Labor Secretary Silvestro Bello mandated the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration to implement the ban. This comes on the heels of reports that foreign employers are refusing to pay for health protocol expenses, which may reach as high as 70,000 pesos. Due to the order, close to 300 OFWs are now stranded in NAIA upon the sudden release of the order. Some fear losing their jobs if they fail to make it to the Middle East immediately. But as it is, more than 100 OFWs are stranded with no jobs in Jeddah, in Saudi Arabia. With most of them stuck in housing facilities and poorly maintained container vans, they are seeking government help to return to the Philippines. Mobile journalist Julie Baiza gives us a front seat to this story.
For almost 2 months now, these container vans serve as temporary homes for over 100 overseas Filipino workers stranded in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Apart from the limited space, power outs are also common in the area. For the OFWs, they are left without a choice after losing their jobs. Most of them now rely on relief assistance from other Filipinos in Jeddah.
Siguro kung may mawala sa amin, matutulungan kami ng gobyerno na mapauwi. Ganun po ba? Ganun po ma'am kasi ang tagal na po namin nanghihingi ng tulong.
Another group of OFWs are also appealing to the Philippine government to be repatriated. They said they were terminated from work and have been staying at a housing facility for about 6 months now. The group says they tried seeking help from various sources but to no avail.
Same problem, it's per di kama, walang sahod, wall out, walang trabaho. Pinagkakasya po namin. Kung mga dilato po, siyempre tinititip namin, noodles, gulay, para lang po makaraos.
The Overseas Workers Welfare Administration or OWA has yet to issue a comment on the status of OFWs in Jeddah. This comes amid the proposal to create a Department of Overseas Filipinos to tackle and promote workers' rights and welfare abroad. The proposal seeks to turn the Philippine Overseas Employment Administration into a department with OWA as an attached agency. Julie Baiza, We Are One News.
Metro Pacific is injecting more interest in vaccines. The company says it is keen to manufacture COVID-19 shots and boosters locally. MPIC Chairman Manny Pangilinan says partnering with other global vaccine producers could help cater to Filipinos with preferred brands. Beyond COVID, Pangilinan says the company might try its hand at producing vaccines for other diseases.
If you're at it anyway, you might as well manufacture vaccines that are applicable to influenza, to polio, to measles, chickenpox, smallpox. You might as well get into it, the full spectrum of vaccines that the Filipino people need, no? If you're going to build the facilities for vaccines.
And another big story in sports, Gilas Pilipinas 3x3 has yet to notch a victory in the FIBA 3x3 Olympic qualifying tournament in Graz, Austria. After 2 tough losses during the first day of competition against Qatar and Slovenia, Gilas 3x3 continued to struggle. It tasted its third defeat in the hands of the Dominican Republic, 22-11. Gilas also lost its final game against France, falling short 14-15. And he's only 21 years old, but Filipino Jin Kurt Barbosa has overcome all odds to become the country's lone taekwondo representative for the Tokyo Olympics. Let's get to know more about him in Gretchen Ho's report.
It's a dream come true for 21-year-old Kurt Barbosa. The young Jin successfully punched an Olympic ticket at the recently held Asian Taekwondo qualification in Amman, Jordan. It looked like all hope was lost after being down 41-26 against hometown bet Zaid Al-Halawani. But with a quick change of strategy in the final round, Kurt came back and won the game with a final score of 50-49.
Yung Taekwondo is parang chess po talaga na kailangan marami kang bala, marami kang strategy.
Kurt was introduced to Taekwondo at age 6, and with his talent and dedication, he has been successful in his young sporting career. He is a UAAP Rookie MVP, a SEA Games gold medalist, and now an Olympian.
Alam po nila yan, sila coach, yung gaano ako kasipag sa training yan, sila papa, kahit na umuwi ako sa probinsya. Disiplinado po talaga ako sa sarili ko na kasi may gusto akong mangyari.
Kurt's family couldn't be any prouder having him qualify for the Olympics at such a young age.
Saan niyo tingin niya nakukuha yung tapang niya?
Sa pamilya namin, hindi po kami mayaman, ganon, kalang. Kaya sabi ko sa kanya, dapat galingan niya para hindi siya maging parang ganito din. Si Kurt, kilala ko na yan, talagang matapang na bata yan. Abra nga, batang abra talaga.
But the job isn't done for Kurt. Taking inspiration from NBA player Russell Westbrook, he hopes to bring home the elusive gold medal for the country.
Tapos yung time ko kasi na yon is laging nagti-triple-double si Westbrook. So yung hashtag niya, why not?
Kurt hopes that his victory would inspire the next generation of Pinoy Taekwondo Jins.
Tapos yung mga atletang katulad ko sa Abra, sana huwag kayo mapagod. Kung may pangarap kayo, dapat niyong tumarin.
Gretchen Ho, We Are One News.
It is so hard to believe, but the Eraserheads were never friends. That's at least according to its frontman Ellie Buendia. In a recent episode of Wake Up with Jim and Saab, Ellie said they were never close. In fact, they do not even drink outside of gigs as a barkada. Ellie said they just had a very, very good working relationship. He also took a swipe at fans who supposedly make them regretful for disbanding in 2002. Ellie said these fans kept citing their 1994 hit Minsan, a song about lost friendship. Looking back, Ellie deemed the song's sentimentality as cringeworthy. He clarified, Minsan is about his actual friends at the iconic Kalayaan dormitory, not Raymond Marasigan, Buddy Zabala, and Marcos Adoro. Ellie's remarks drew mixed reactions. In a now deleted tweet, he questioned why it was still a big deal, even getting hate for telling the truth. For Ellie, the music is all that matters. Raymond, Buddy, and Marcos have yet to comment on the matter. Nick Garcia, We Are One News.
Free donuts, free beer, and dating app perks are just enough to convince Americans to get vaccinated. So Ohio has raised the bar, and we mean literally raised, by giving 5 vaccinated adult residents $1 million each. In fact, there was already a winner at Governor Mike DeWine's lottery, Vax a Million. 4 more winners will be announced in the coming weeks. Of course, there's also a kids edition of the raffle. For 5 children aged 12 to 17, Ohio is offering college scholarships, tuition, room and board, and books included. More than 2.7 million adults and 104,000 children have signed up. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again Monday at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.